The silver transport ship docked with Luna Station at exactly 0800 hours. Professor Crix-9 checked his readings one more time, making sure his environmental suit was working properly. Behind him, 12 alien students from across the galaxy prepared for their first encounter with humans. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The Galactic Education Consortium had chosen Earth as their newest case study. For 3 years, Professor Crix-9 had been planning this field trip to what the galaxy classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. He had studied hundreds of dangerous planets during his long career, but Earth was special. It was the only Class 12 world that had produced a space-traveling species. Remember your lessons, Professor Crix-9 told his students through the communication system. We are here to observe and learn. The humans have agreed to show us their world, but we must be careful. This planet has killed more survey teams than any other world in known space. Zix Prime, a student from the crystalline Zephyrian race, adjusted his protective gear nervously. His crystal body could survive in the vacuum of space, but the radiation levels around Earth required special shielding. Professor, are you sure? The humans can be trusted. The reports say they are predators. That is exactly what we are here to find out, the professor replied. The humans claim to be peaceful, but they come from a world that should not be able to support intelligent life. We need to understand how they survived. The airlock hissed open, and the alien delegation stepped into Luna Station. The first thing they noticed was the gravity. Even on Earth's moon, the gravitational pull was stronger than most of their homeworlds. Several students had to activate their support systems just to walk normally. Captain Jake Morrison was waiting for them. In the reception area, he was a typical human male, about 6 feet tall with dark hair and friendly brown eyes. To the aliens, he looked like a perfectly designed killing machine. His muscles moved smoothly under his skin, and his eyes seemed to track everything around him at once. Welcome to Luna Station, Captain Morrison said with a wide smile that showed his white teeth. The students instinctively stepped back. Those teeth looked very sharp to creatures who had evolved on worlds where nothing hunted anything else. Thank you for having us, Professor Crix-9 replied carefully. We are honored that humanity has agreed to participate in our educational program. Jake laughed, a sound that made several students jump. No problem at all. We're excited to show you around. Dr. Carter is on her way up from Earth right now. She'll be your main guide for the surface tour. The captain led them through the station's corridors. The alien students were amazed by how casually the human workers moved through the environment. Luna Station operated at radiation levels that would require most species to wear full protection suits, but the humans walked around in simple uniforms. Some of them were not even wearing helmets. Is it safe for your people to work in these conditions? Asked Nebula Song, a gaseous being from the Nebuloid Collective. Jake looked confused for a moment. Safe? Oh, you mean the radiation? Yeah, it's pretty low here compared to Earth. The magnetic field takes care of most of it. We only need the heavy gear when we're working outside the station. The students exchanged worried glances. If this was considered safe, what was Earth like? They entered the main observation deck, where they could see Earth hanging in space like a blue and green jewel. It looked beautiful and peaceful from this distance, but Professor Crix-9 knew better. His instruments were already detecting energy signatures that would be considered dangerous on most worlds. There she is, Jake said proudly. Home sweet home. Dr. Carter should be arriving soon. She's bringing some samples and data files for your research. A few minutes later, the transport from Earth docked with the station. Dr. Lisa Carter stepped out of the airlock, and the alien students got their second shock of the day. She was a small human female, probably no more than 5.5 feet tall, but she moved with the same predatory grace as Captain Morrison. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple style, and her blue eyes seemed to miss nothing. Sorry I'm late, she said cheerfully. Had to wait for a storm to pass. Nothing major, just a Category 2 hurricane, barely worth mentioning. The students looked at each other in alarm. A Category 2 hurricane would destroy most of their cities, but this human spoke of it like a minor inconvenience. Dr. Carter set down several containers on the table. I brought some samples of Earth's basic materials for you to examine. Just simple things like water, soil, and air from different regions. Professor Crix-9 carefully scanned the containers with his instruments. The readings made his circuits freeze with shock. Dr. Carter, these samples are highly dangerous. The water contains dissolved minerals that would be toxic to most species. The soil has bacterial content that could kill my students in minutes, and the oxygen concentration alone would burn our lungs. Dr. Carter looked genuinely surprised. Really? These are from some of our safest regions. I specifically chose samples from areas where we let our children play unsupervised. The weight of that statement hit the students like a physical blow. Humans let their young ones play in environments that would kill trained adult aliens. Perhaps we should begin with some basic information about your world, Professor Crix-9 suggested, trying to keep his voice steady. Dr. Carter activated a holographic display showing Earth's basic statistics. Earth is about 12,800 kilometers in diameter. Surface gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. Atmospheric pressure at sea level is about 101 kilopascals. Surface temperatures range from about -90 to +60 degrees Celsius, depending on location and season. Each number hit the students like a hammer blow. The gravity alone would crush half of them. The atmospheric pressure would implode their ships. The temperature variations would freeze or boil their body fluids. How do you survive? Whispered. Harmony of depths. An aquatic thalassin whose homeworld had perfectly stable conditions. Survive? Dr. Carter looked puzzled. We don't just survive. We thrive. Earth currently supports about 8 billion humans, plus countless other species. It's really quite a pleasant world to live on. Captain Morrison nodded in agreement. I grew up in Colorado. Great place for kids. We used to hike in the mountains every weekend. The thin air up there really builds character. The students were beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had come to study a Deathworld, expecting to find a species barely clinging to life on a hostile planet. Instead, they had found creatures who considered their hellish world to be a pleasant place to raise children. Before we visit Earth's surface, Professor Crix-9 said carefully, perhaps we could tour some of the local facilities, just to help my students adjust to the conditions gradually? Sure thing, Jake replied. We've got mining operations on the far side of the moon, and there's a nice research station in one of the craters. Pretty standard stuff. Should be a nice, easy introduction to human engineering. As they prepared to leave the observation deck, Dr. Carter made one final comment that would haunt the students' dreams for weeks to come. Oh, and don't worry about the radiation levels in the mining areas. They're actually lower than what we get during a typical day on Earth. We just tell the new workers it's dangerous, so they'll be careful with the equipment. The alien students followed their human guides deeper into Luna Station, each step taking them further into a reality that challenged everything they thought they knew about life in the universe. They had come to study a Deathworld, but they were beginning to suspect they were really here to study the creatures who had made that Deathworld their home. The transport shuttle carried the alien students across the lunar surface toward the mining facility. Through the windows, they could see the stark landscape of Earth's moon. No atmosphere, no protection from radiation, and temperatures that swung from boiling hot to freezing cold depending on where the sun was shining. Beautiful view, isn't it? Captain Morrison said as he piloted the shuttle. I never get tired of seeing the Earth rise over the horizon. Makes you appreciate home. The students pressed against the windows to look at the blue planet hanging in the black sky. From this distance it looked peaceful, but they now knew better. That beautiful blue world was a death trap that had somehow created the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The mining facility came into view as they rounded a crater. It was much larger than any of the students had expected. Massive structures stretched across the lunar surface, and they could see dozens of humans working outside in the vacuum of space. Here we are, Jake announced. Lunar Mining Station 7, one of our smaller operations, but it's perfect for showing you how we work. The shuttle docked with the main facility, and they were met by Foreman Ben Taylor. He was a big man with rough hands and a friendly smile. His work clothes were covered in dust, and he smelled like metal and machine oil. Welcome to the mine, Ben said, shaking hands with Professor Crix-9. The alien professor was shocked by the strength of the human's grip. Ben was not even trying to be forceful. but his casual handshake could have crushed most of the students' limbs. "We are honored to see your operation," the professor replied, trying to hide his nervousness. Ben led them through the facility, explaining how the mining process worked. The students were amazed by the scale of the operation. Humans were moving equipment that weighed several tons as if it were nothing. The low gravity of the moon made the work easier, but the students knew that most species would still need heavy machinery for such tasks. "The really impressive work happens outside," Ben said as they approached the observation windows. "We've got teams working the surface deposits right now." The students looked out at the lunar surface and saw something that made their minds freeze. With shock, human workers were operating in the vacuum of space with only basic protective suits. They were lifting massive chunks of rock and metal, loading them onto vehicles that would struggle to carry such weight on most worlds. "Is it safe for them to work in those conditions?" asked Zix Prime, his crystal form flickering with nervous energy. Ben laughed. "Safe? Sure, as long as they don't do anything stupid. The suits are pretty reliable and the low gravity makes everything easier. Back on Earth, this same work would be much harder." One of the workers outside was operating a drilling machine that was larger than some of the students' entire bodies. He was handling it like it was a simple tool, moving it around with casual ease. "How strong are your people?" whispered Harmony of Depths. "Strong?" Ben looked confused. "We're just regular humans, nothing special. The gravity here is only about 1/6 of Earth normal, so everything feels pretty light." The implications of that statement hit the students like a physical blow. If the humans were this strong in low gravity, what were they like in their natural environment? Their tour continued to the processing center, where raw materials were refined into useful products. The students watched human workers handle substances that would require robotic systems on most worlds. The heat from the furnaces would have killed many alien species, but the humans worked comfortably in the hot environment. "Temperature regulation is pretty simple," Ben explained when Professor Crix9 asked about safety measures. "We just make sure the air circulation is good and everyone drinks plenty of water, standard workplace safety stuff." The students were beginning to understand that human ideas about safety were very different from the rest of the galaxy. What they considered normal precautions would be extreme measures on most worlds. As they continued the tour, an alarm began to sound. The students immediately panicked, thinking they were under attack or facing some kind of disaster, but the human workers barely reacted. "What's happening?" Professor Crix9 asked, his voice tight with fear. "Suit breach in Section C," Ben replied, calmly checking his communication device. "Looks like Zix Prime's environmental suit has a problem." The crystalline student was indeed in trouble. His protective suit had been damaged by a piece of sharp metal, and his life support systems were failing. On most worlds, this would mean certain death. "We need to evacuate him immediately," Professor Crix9 said, moving toward the emergency equipment. "Hold on," Captain Morrison said, already moving toward the airlock. "I'll get him." Before anyone could stop him, Jake grabbed a simple breathing mask and stepped into the airlock. The students watched in horror as he cycled through into the vacuum of space wearing nothing but his regular clothes and a basic air supply. "He's going to die," Nebula Song whispered. But Captain Morrison did not die. He moved through the vacuum like he was walking through air, reached Zix Prime in seconds, and began emergency repairs on the damaged suit. The students watched through the observation windows as he worked with calm efficiency in an environment that would have killed them instantly. The repair took 4 minutes. 4 minutes in hard vacuum with minimal protection. When Jake finally brought Zix Prime back into the pressurized area, he was breathing normally and seemed completely unaffected by his experience. "There you go," he said to the shaken crystalline student. "Just a small tear in the outer layer. These suits are pretty tough, but sometimes sharp edges can catch them." "How did you survive out there?" Zix Prime asked, his voice shaking. Jake looked confused. "Survive? It's just vacuum. I held my breath and worked fast. No big deal. I've done longer breath holds swimming back home." Dr. Carter, who had been monitoring the situation from the control room, joined them with a medical scanner. "Let me check you over, Zix Prime. Vacuum exposure can be tricky for non-human species." As she worked, she made casual conversation. Good thing this happened here instead of Earth. The atmospheric pressure down there makes suit breaches much more dangerous. Plus, there's all that oxygen in the air. Very reactive stuff. The students were quiet as they processed what they had just witnessed. A human had voluntarily entered a vacuum to save an alien student. He had survived conditions that would have killed most galactic species, and he acted like it was a normal part of his job. Is Captain Morrison specially trained for such situations? Professor Crix9 asked. Jake? Not really, Ben replied. He's got basic emergency training, same as all of us. Pretty standard stuff for anyone who works in space. All of you can do what he just did? Sure. It's not that hard. You just have to be careful and not panic. The human body can handle vacuum. For a few minutes if you know what you're doing. The students looked at each other with growing alarm. Every human they had met so far had capabilities that would make them elite specialists on most worlds. But these humans considered themselves ordinary people doing ordinary jobs. The tour continued, but the students were no longer focused on the mining operation. They were studying the humans themselves, trying to understand what kind of species could survive in conditions that would destroy most known life forms. As they prepared to return to Luna Station, Ben made one final comment that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. This has been fun, but wait until you see Earth itself. That's where things get really interesting. The moon is pretty tame compared to home. The students climbed back into the shuttle, each of them beginning to realize that they had not come to study a Deathworld. They had come to study the creatures who had conquered it. The descent to Earth's surface was the most terrifying experience of the alien students' lives. Their transport ship had to pass through layers of atmosphere that would have torn apart most spacecraft. The students watched their instruments register, pressure levels and gravitational forces that should have crushed them all. Don't worry about the turbulence, Dr. Carter said cheerfully as the ship shook violently. It's just a little atmospheric friction. We'll be through the worst of it. In a few minutes, Professor Crix9 gripped his seat as another wave of turbulence hit them. Dr. Carter, our instruments show that we are experiencing forces that would destroy most vessels. Really? She looked genuinely surprised. This is actually a pretty smooth entry. Wait until you see what it's like during storm season. The ship finally broke through the clouds and the students got their first real look at Earth's surface. What they saw made their worst fears seem like pleasant dreams. The landscape below was a nightmare of impossible extremes. Massive mountain ranges reached heights that would collapse under their own weight on most worlds. Vast oceans stretched beyond the horizon, containing more water than existed on some entire planets. Welcome to North America, Dr. Carter announced as they approached the landing site. We're going to set down in Kansas, one of our more peaceful regions. The students could see storm clouds gathering in the distance. Lightning flashed between the clouds, each bolt containing enough energy to power a small city. On their homeworld, such electrical displays would be considered weapons of mass destruction. The ship landed in what Dr. Carter called a typical prairie. To the alien students, it looked like a war zone. The grass was taller than many of them, and it moved in waves as wind blew across the landscape. The sky above was a threatening gray color, with clouds that seemed to boil with barely contained violence. Looks like we might get a little rain, Dr. Carter observed, checking her simple, handheld device. Nothing serious, just a small thunderstorm moving through. The students put on their most protective gear before stepping outside. Even with full environmental suits, they could feel the crushing weight of Earth's atmosphere pressing down on them. The gravity was so strong that several students had to activate mechanical supports just to stand upright. Dr. Carter stepped out of the ship wearing nothing but light clothing and a simple jacket. She breathed the toxic atmosphere as if it were perfectly normal, and she moved easily in the crushing gravity that was making the students struggle just to walk. Beautiful day, she said, looking up at the threatening sky. The air smells like rain. I love that smell. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the students huddled together in fear. The sound was like the roar of some impossible monster, loud enough to damage their hearing even through their protective gear. What was that noise? Nebula Song asked, his gaseous form quivering with terror. Just thunder, Dr. Carter replied. It's the sound that lightning makes when it heats the air. Pretty normal for this time of year. As if to prove her point, a massive bolt of lightning struck a tree about a mile away. The flash was bright enough to temporarily blind several students, and the thunder that followed shook the ground beneath their feet. "That was close," Dr. Carter said, sounding pleased rather than frightened. "We should probably head for the forest before the real storm gets here." Park Ranger Tom Walker was waiting for them at the edge of what he called a gentle woodland area. He was a tall, lean human with weathered skin and calm eyes. Like all the humans they had met, he moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator. "Welcome to Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve," Tom said with a warm smile. "We've got a nice, easy trail picked out for you. Should be perfect for a group that's new to Earth." The students followed Tom into what he called a forest, but what looked to them like a green hell of impossible proportions. The trees rose hundreds of feet into the air, their trunks so thick that it would take dozens of the students holding hands to encircle them. The canopy above blocked out most of the sky, creating a dim twilight world below. "These are oak trees," Tom explained as they walked along the trail. "Pretty standard for this region. They're only about 200 years old, so they're still young." "Young?" The students looked up at the massive trees in shock. On most worlds, such giants would be considered ancient wonders. Here they were barely mature. "The ecosystem here is pretty simple," Tom continued. "We've got your basic woodland creatures. Nothing too exciting. Deer, squirrels, raccoons, that sort of thing." As if summoned by his words, a white-tailed deer stepped onto the trail ahead of them. The students froze in terror. The creature was enormous, standing nearly 4 feet tall and weighing at least 200 pounds. Its muscles rippled under its brown coat, and when it turned to look at them, its dark eyes showed an intelligence that was both beautiful and frightening. "Oh, look," Tom said softly. "A doe with her fawn. Aren't they pretty?" The students saw the smaller deer hiding behind its mother and realized with horror that this was a family group. The adult deer was protecting its young, and both animals looked capable of trampling the entire alien delegation without effort. "Are they dangerous?" Professor Crix 9 whispered. Tom looked confused. "Dangerous? No, they're deer. Pretty harmless, really. They might run if you get too close, but they won't hurt you unless you really bother them." The deer family moved away through the forest with a grace that made the students' mechanical movements look clumsy by comparison. Each step was perfectly placed, and they moved through the dense undergrowth without making a sound. "How fast can they move?" Zix Prime asked. "Oh, pretty fast when they want to," Tom replied casually. "Maybe 30 or 40 miles per hour through terrain like this. They're built for running. 30 miles per hour through dense forest." The students tried to imagine moving at such speeds through the maze of trees and undergrowth. Most of them would be smashed to pieces in seconds. The storm that Dr. Carter had mentioned was getting closer. The wind was picking up, making the massive trees sway back and forth with creaking groans that sounded like the death cries of ancient giants. Lightning flashed more frequently now, and the thunder was getting louder. "We should probably pick up the pace," Tom said, checking the darkening sky. "This storm looks like it might be a good one." They emerged from the forest onto a hill overlooking a small farm. In the distance, they could see a simple house surrounded by fields of crops. Smoke rose from the chimney, and there were lights in the windows that looked warm and welcoming. "That's the Johnson farm," Tom explained. "Mary and her family have been working this land for 3 generations. Good people. They've agreed to let us visit and show you how humans live in rural areas." As they approached the farmhouse, the storm finally arrived. Rain began to fall in heavy drops that hit the students' protective suits like bullets. The wind picked up to a howling roar that made communication difficult, even through their electronic systems. But Mary Johnson came out to greet them, as if nothing unusual was happening. She was a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and a kind smile. Her hair was wet from the rain, but she seemed completely unbothered by the storm raging around them. "Welcome to our home," she called out over the wind. "Come on inside before you get soaked." The students hurried into the farmhouse, grateful to escape the fury of the storm outside. But inside they found something that shocked them even more than the weather. 3 human children were playing quietly in the living room. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5 years old. But when he looked up at the alien visitors, his eyes showed the same predatory awareness they had seen in every human they met. "This is my son Danny," Mary said proudly. "Say hello to our guests, sweetheart." Danny Johnson walked over to Professor Crick's 9 and held out his small hand. When the professor shook it, he was amazed by the strength in those tiny fingers. This human child, who weighed less than 50 pounds, had a grip that could match adult members of several alien species. "Are you really from space?" Danny asked with the innocent curiosity of a young predator learning about the world. "Yes, we are," Professor Crick's 9 replied, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "Cool," Danny said, then went back to his toys as if meeting aliens was just another normal part of his day. Through the windows, they could see the storm continuing to rage outside. Lightning struck the ground repeatedly, each bolt bright enough to light up the entire landscape. The thunder was constant now, a rolling barrage of sound that would have terrified most civilizations. But the Johnson family went about their evening routine as if nothing was happening. Mary prepared dinner while her children did their homework. Her husband came in from checking on the animals, shaking water off his coat like it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Storm's picking up," he said to Mary. "Might lose power if it gets much worse." "We've got candles if we need them," she replied. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. The students realized they were watching a family of apex predators living peacefully in an environment that would kill most galactic species within minutes, and they were doing it so casually that they barely noticed the deadly conditions around them. Outside, Earth's storm continued to rage, showing the alien visitors just a small sample of what the humans called pretty normal weather. The next morning brought clear skies and what Dr. Carter called perfect weather for sightseeing. The alien students had spent a sleepless night listening to the sounds of Earth's nocturnal creatures. Even through the walls of the farmhouse and their protective gear, they could hear things moving in the darkness outside. Owls hooting, coyotes howling, and insects making sounds that would have been considered weapons on most worlds. "Sleep well?" Mary Johnson asked as she served them breakfast. Her children were already dressed and ready for school, acting as if the previous night's storm had been nothing more than a gentle shower. The sounds outside were quite active, Professor Crick's 9 said carefully. "Oh, you mean the night sounds?" Mary smiled. "Yeah, the farm can be pretty noisy at night, lots of wildlife around here. The kids are so used to it they can sleep through anything." The students watched 5-year-old Danny Johnson eat his breakfast with casual ease. The food on his plate would have been toxic to most alien species, but he consumed it like it was perfectly normal fuel for his growing body. When he finished, he picked up his school backpack, which looked heavy enough to contain survival gear for a dangerous expedition. "What's in the bag?" Harmony of Depths asked. "Just school stuff," Danny replied. "Books, pencils, my lunch, nothing special." The bag weighed at least 30 pounds, but the small human child carried it like it was empty. The students were beginning to understand that human children were stronger than many adult aliens. After breakfast, they traveled to what Dr. Carter called one of Earth's most peaceful regions, the Global Wildlife Preserve in Kenya, Africa. The transport flight took them over landscapes that looked like scenes from alien nightmares, vast deserts where the sand could reach temperatures hot enough to melt metal, mountain ranges covered in ice and snow where the cold would freeze most, life forms solid, oceans so deep that the pressure at the bottom would crush starships. "Africa is beautiful this time of year," Dr. Carter said as they descended toward the preserve. "Perfect weather for seeing the animals. Not too hot, not too cold. The temperature outside was 40 degrees Celsius, hot enough to kill most of the students even with their protective suits." But Dr. Carter stepped off the transport wearing light khaki clothing and a simple hat, looking completely comfortable. Steve Adams, their wildlife guide, was waiting for them at the preserve entrance. He was a lean, sun-weathered man with calm eyes and steady hands. Like all the humans they had met, he moved with the fluid grace of a natural hunter. "Welcome to the Masai Mara," Steve said with a warm smile. "We've got some wonderful animals to show you today. All perfectly safe, of course. These are our protected species, protected species." The students soon learned what that phrase meant in human terms. Their first stop was what Steve called the lion viewing area. The students expected to see the creatures from a safe distance, perhaps through reinforced barriers or from inside an armored vehicle. Instead, Steve led them to an open platform just 50 meters from a pride of African lions. The students froze in absolute terror. The lions were enormous, each one weighing over 400 pounds of pure muscle and bone. Their golden eyes tracked the movement of the alien visitors with the cold calculation of perfect predators. When the largest male stood up and stretched, the students could see claws as long as their fingers and teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Beautiful animals," Steve said admiringly. "This pride has been here for about 8 years. Very successful hunters. The big male there is called Simba by the local guides. Are we safe here?" Six Prime whispered, his crystal form flickering with fear. Steve looked confused. "Safe? Of course. We're far enough away that they won't bother us unless we do something. Really stupid. Lions generally avoid humans anyway." Generally avoid humans. The students tried to process this information. These creatures, which could tear apart armored vehicles, avoided humans. What did that say about humanity? Their next stop was even more terrifying. Steve led them to a watering hole where a family of African elephants had come to drink. The students had thought the lions were large, but the elephants were beyond their comprehension. The largest bull stood over 12 feet tall and weighed more than most of their spacecraft. "Elephants are some of my favorite animals," Steve said as they watched the giants move through the water. "So intelligent and gentle. The matriarch there is about 60 years old. She's been leading this herd for decades." "Gentle?" The students watched in horror as the massive creatures moved through their environment with casual power. When one of the younger elephants playfully splashed water, the spray traveled over 100 meters, a casual movement that could have knocked over buildings. "How do you study such dangerous creatures?" Professor Crix9 asked. "Dangerous?" Steve seemed genuinely surprised. "Elephants aren't dangerous unless you threaten them or they're young. Most of the time, they just ignore humans completely. I've walked within 10 meters of wild elephants hundreds of times." He had walked within 10 meters of creatures that could crush him without effort, and he considered this normal behavior. The tour continued to the crocodile sanctuary, where the students met Earth's ultimate nightmare predators. Nile crocodiles lounged in the sun like living weapons waiting to be activated. Some of them were over 20 feet long, with jaws powerful enough to crush stone. "These guys are true survivors," Steve explained as they watched the massive reptiles from what he considered a safe distance. "They've basically unchanged for millions of years. Perfect predators." One of the crocodiles slipped into the water with barely a splash, disappearing completely despite its enormous size. The students realized they were looking at creatures that had mastered stealth, strength, and patience in ways that would make them undetectable weapons on most worlds. "Do humans swim in waters where these creatures live?" Nebula Song asked. "Sometimes," Steve replied. "You have to be careful, of course. But people fish and boat on crocodile rivers all the time. It's mostly about knowing what you're doing and respecting the animals. People voluntarily entered the hunting grounds of perfect predators for recreation." Their final stop of the day was the marine sanctuary, where they boarded a boat to observe what Steve called some of Earth's gentler ocean dwellers. The students soon discovered that human definitions of gentle were very different from galactic norms. Great white sharks circled their boat with casual menace. Each one was over 15 feet long with teeth like serrated daggers and dead black eyes that showed no emotion except hunger. They moved through the water with the terrible grace of creatures designed for killing. "Beautiful animals," Dr. Carter said as she watched the sharks through the boat's transparent bottom. "Perfect examples of evolutionary efficiency." "Dr. Carter," Professor Crix9 said carefully, "these creatures appear to be extremely dangerous predators." "Dangerous? Not really. Shark attacks on humans are incredibly rare. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than attacked by a shark. These guys mostly just ignore us." As if to prove her point, one of the boat crew members put on simple diving gear and slipped into the water. The students watched in absolute horror as the human swam calmly among the sharks, taking photographs and collecting samples. The shark circled him with interest but made no aggressive moves. "That's our marine biologist, Dr. Rodriguez," Steve explained. "He's been diving with sharks for 20 years, never had a problem." The human floated in the water surrounded by creatures that could tear him apart in seconds, and he acted like he was swimming in a peaceful pond. On the way back to their transport, they stopped at the preserve's research center. Dr. Patricia Wood, the facility's curator, showed them through the Museum of Earth's Natural History. What they saw there broke their understanding of reality completely. "This is our geological timeline," Dr. Wood explained, leading them past displays showing Earth's past. "These exhibits show life on Earth over the last 500 million years." The students stared at fossils and reconstructions of creatures that made the current wildlife look small and gentle. Tyrannosaurus rex with jaws powerful enough to crush vehicles. Megalodons, sharks the size of spacecraft. Saber-toothed cats with fangs like swords. "These creatures all lived on Earth?" Harmony of Depths whispered. "Oh yes," Dr. Wood replied cheerfully. "Earth has always been home to remarkable predators. These are just some of the more impressive examples from our fossil record." What happened to them? Mass extinction events mostly. Climate change, asteroid impacts, volcanic activity. Earth has had 5 major extinction events that we know of. Each time, most life dies out and new species evolve to fill the empty niches. The students tried to process this information. Earth had experienced 5 separate apocalypses, each one destroying most life on the planet. And yet life had returned, each time stronger and more dangerous than before. "The amazing thing," Dr. Wood continued, "is how life always bounces back. Earth's current ecosystem is actually quite mild compared to some periods in the past. We're living in a relatively peaceful time." Peaceful? The students looked at each other with growing horror. If this was Earth during a peaceful period, what had it been like during the violent times? The journey back to Luna Station should have been peaceful, but the universe had other plans. Halfway through their return flight, alarms began sounding throughout the transport ship. The students huddled together in fear as emergency lights flashed red and warning signals blared. "Solar flare incoming," the ship's pilot announced calmly. "Looks like a big one. We're going to have some system problems." Dr. Carter moved to the communication panel with the fluid grace the students had learned to associate with human efficiency. "Luna Station, this is Transport 7. We're showing radiation spike warnings. What's our status?" The reply came back, filled with static. "Transport 7, we're reading Class X solar flare activity. Station systems are going into emergency mode. You'll need to dock manually and fast." The students watched in growing panic as their ship's automated systems began, shutting down one by one. The lights dimmed, the air recycling system went quiet, and their environmental controls started failing. For most galactic species, this would mean certain death. But the humans did not panic. Captain Morrison took manual control of the ship as if he had been expecting this moment his entire life. His hands moved over the controls with perfect precision, compensating for system failures before they became critical. Dr. Carter moved through the ship checking on the alien students, her movements calm and purposeful. "Don't worry," she told Professor Crix-9 as she adjusted his environmental suit. "Solar flares are pretty common. We deal with them all the time." Pretty common. The students tried to process this information while their ship flew through a radiation storm that would sterilize most worlds. The humans were treating it like a minor inconvenience. Luna Station came into view, and the students could see that it was in emergency mode. Lights flickered across its surface as systems struggled to cope with the radiation bombardment. Warning. Beacons flashed in patterns that meant danger in every galactic language. "Station approach is going to be tricky," Jake announced. "Most of the docking computers are down. We'll have to do this the old-fashioned way." The old-fashioned way turned out to mean that Captain Morrison piloted their ship to the station using nothing but his own skills and basic instruments. The students watched through the windows as he brought them in for a perfect docking while radiation levels spiked to lethal ranges around them. As soon as they were connected to the station, more alarms began sounding. The radiation storm was affecting Luna Station's life support systems, creating conditions that would kill the alien, students within minutes. The humans sprang into action with a coordination that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. Captain Morrison headed for the power systems while Dr. Carter moved to life support controls. Other human crew members appeared from all directions, each one moving to their assigned tasks without hesitation or confusion. Carlos, get to environmental systems, Dr. Carter called out to a maintenance worker. Ben, we need emergency power to sections 7 through 12. Carlos Martinez, whom they had met earlier, moved through the corridors with the same predatory grace as all the humans. He carried tools that would have required lifting equipment for most species, and he worked in areas where radiation levels were climbing toward fatal ranges. How long can we survive in these conditions? Professor Crix 9 asked Dr. Carter as she worked at a control panel. How long can we survive? Dr. Carter looked confused as she rerouted power systems with casual expertise. The radiation isn't that bad yet. We've got several hours before it becomes really dangerous. Several hours. The levels that were currently making the alien students' instruments scream warnings were considered not that bad by human standards. The students watched as the humans worked together with a precision that spoke of extensive training and natural coordination. But when Professor Crix 9 asked about their emergency protocols, he received another shock. Emergency protocols? Captain Morrison replied as he welded a damaged power coupling with his bare hands. This is just standard maintenance stuff. We don't really have formal protocols for solar flares. Everyone just knows what to do. Everyone just knew what to do. The students realized they were watching a species that had evolved such perfect coordination that they could respond to deadly emergencies without even needing to plan or communicate extensively. Ben Taylor appeared carrying a replacement component that weighed several hundred pounds. He installed it in the life support system while standing in a radiation field that would have killed most aliens instantly. When he finished, he wiped his hands on his work clothes and moved on to the next repair as if he had just changed a light bulb. Is Ben specially trained for radiation work? Six Prime asked. Radiation work? Dr. Carter looked puzzled. He's just a maintenance guy. All our people can handle basic radiation exposure. It's not really a big deal unless you're talking about really high levels. Really high levels. The students' instruments were showing radiation that would sterilize entire cities on most worlds, and the humans considered it basic exposure, as the repairs continued. The students noticed something else that chilled them to their cores. The humans were not just working efficiently, they were enjoying themselves. Captain Morrison was humming while he worked on electrical systems. Carlos was whistling as he crawled through maintenance tunnels. Dr. Carter was actually smiling as she coordinated the emergency response. Are you not afraid? Harmony of Depths asked. Afraid? Dr. Carter paused in her work to look at the gaseous alien. Afraid of what? This is just a solar flare. We get them all the time. It's actually kind of exciting when a big one hits. Breaks up the routine. Exciting. Humans found deadly radiation storms exciting because they broke up the routine of their normal lives. The repairs took 3 hours. 3 hours of work in conditions that would have been impossible for most galactic civilizations. When the humans finally restored full power and life support to the station, they acted like they had just completed a routine maintenance check. There we go, Captain Morrison announced as the last system came back online. All fixed. Sorry about the excitement, folks. These solar storms can be a pain, but they're not usually too bad. Not usually too bad. The students realized that this event, which would have been recorded as a major disaster on most worlds, was something humans considered a minor inconvenience. As the radiation levels dropped back to what humans considered normal, Professor Crix 9 gathered his students in the observation lounge. They needed to discuss what they had learned during their visit to Earth and its moon. I believe we need to revise our understanding of the human species, the professor said carefully. Our initial assumptions appear to have been incorrect. HiveMind Unit 7 spoke first. The humans are not survivors of their world's dangers. They are the dangers that their world created. Every aspect of their evolution was shaped by conditions that would destroy most life, Zix Prime added, his crystal form still flickering with nervous energy. They developed persistence hunting because they needed to chase prey across impossible distances. They evolved pack coordination because they had to work together to survive against creatures much larger than themselves. Nebula songs gaseous, forms swirled with agitation. They learned to process toxins that would kill other species. They adapted to heal from injuries that would be fatal elsewhere. They developed the ability to survive in environmental conditions that would doom entire civilizations. Most terrifying of all, Harmony of Depths whispered, they genuinely do not understand how dangerous they are. To them, surviving the impossible is just normal life. Professor Crix 9 looked out the observation windows at Earth hanging in space below them. The beautiful blue and green world looked peaceful from this distance, but he now knew better. It was not a world that had produced a dangerous species. It was a world that had produced the ultimate species. The Galactic Consortium's classification was correct, he said finally, but it was incomplete. Earth is not dangerous because of what lives there alongside humans. Earth is dangerous because it created humans. The students sat in silence as they processed this revelation. They had come to study a Deathworld, expecting to find a species barely surviving on a hostile planet. Instead, they had found apex predators from the ultimate Deathworld who were now spreading across the galaxy. Dr. Carter appeared in the doorway of the observation lounge, her friendly smile as warm as ever. Hey, everyone ready to head home? The transport back to your ship is ready whenever you are. Dr. Carter, Professor Crix 9 said carefully, we want to thank you for showing us your world. It has been very educational. No problem at all, she replied cheerfully. We enjoyed having you visit. Earth's always nice this time of year. Barely any natural disasters, and the wildlife's been pretty calm. You should come back during storm season sometime. That's when things really get interesting. Storm season. The students tried to imagine what humans considered interesting weather, given that they had called a deadly thunderstorm pretty normal. As they prepared to leave Luna Station, Captain Morrison made one final comment that would stay with them forever. Thanks for visiting, folks. Hope you learned something useful. And don't worry about that solar flare. Happens all the time out here.